I knew my dad was a World War II veteran. I always thought he was called a Seabee, but I found out it was actually United States Navy Reserve before the Seabees were founded. I knew he was in because every now and then I'd get to wear one of my brothers would wear a sailor's hat on Halloween. We'd go out as a sailor trick-or-treating, but never really asked my dad anything about it. It was just seemed like it wasn't important to know, or he didn't want to talk about it.
It's terrible. And I won't even try to tell you his story, except he had to go to Vietnam.
There's things had happened in Vietnam that I don't want to talk about, but those are some things that I asked forgiveness for. And I know I'm forgiven, but it still hurts. I think I'll have closure on those. The day I die, then it's going to be closed. But there's just certain thoughts and feelings that I can't really describe to my wife. I can't describe to the mental health specialist at the VA, even though I try, and that's his job to listen and it's just, I guess it's just some scars that I'm going to carry. And that's just the way it's going to have to be, or the way it's going to be, I guess.
My name is Raymond McCalister. So I was born in Alicia, Arkansas in 1923. Come to Santa Paula from Arkansas when I was 2 years old, and I don't remember it. My grandmother told my father that he was not going to live in Arkansas and be a sharecropper. You're going to California and learn a trade. If you had a nickel in your pocket, you had a lot of money. It was rough enough that a lot of people who are spoiled today, they would never make it. My father was a carpenter and my mother was a homemaker.
So what was carpenter work like during the Depression?
Slow and scarce. I enlisted in the Navy. I stayed out as long as I thought it was safe to stay out. And about a week and a half before I had my papers delivered to me by my boss for my draft notice. But I had already enlisted in the Navy that week and a half before.
And when was that? When did you enlist?
October 1942.
What did your parents think about you enlisting?
They thought it was a job and take care of it.
So you enlisted in the Navy. Where did you go to basic training?
Williamsburg, Virginia.
And where did you go from there?
I went from Williamsburg, Virginia to Rhode Island, and from Rhode Island to Europe. $50 and 60-foot swells, and that didn't bother me a bit. But then we got into a roll, and that scared the daylights out of me, because there were only 11,000 of us on the ship. We landed in Glasgow off the Clyde River. We were there until something, I don't know what happened, something. And then we went to England, and the 29th Construction Battalion had already been there ahead of us, and turned that golf course into a Navy base. And we did, our commissary chief, he was a real good cook. And as soon as we got there, they put him to work, and everybody else went to work too. And then we were a receiving and shipping depot for naval goods.
And what was your role?
I was a machinist mate, and I knew how to run most equipment that the boys that I was with didn't even know how to drive. So they put me on a crane first thing, unloading railroad cars. And then after that, they put me on a truck of hauling the stuff, letting somebody else unload, hauling it to a warehouse, and then unloading it in a warehouse. And while I was driving truck over there, my run was from Falmouth, England to Penzance in Land's End. So it was the southern portion of England that we serviced 4 bases on what the boys in the water were needed. I was based all time in England for active duty, yes.
And how long total?
Came home in the summer of 45, and I think my discharge was October of 45.
So you met your wife over there, right?
Yes, ma'am.
So tell me about that.
She was a jewel. She was a Navy paymaster in the Royal Navy, and she's out here in the cemetery now. And people wonder why it says on her tombstone the HMS Drake. That was where she was stationed. And every opportunity I had, we got together and spent time together.
How did you meet her?
During an air raid. A mate that I was with there, we'd been in hospital and talked the corpsman into giving us a pass just to go downtown, maybe have a beer or something. He said, you go down there, you all get drunk. I said, no, we're not going to get drunk. I don't like getting drunk. Never did. And so he gave us a pass. But our base was behind the Manameed Hospital in Plymouth, England. And the bus driver wouldn't come up the hill with us because the Germans were dropping lights. They were lighting up the situation. They were getting ready to bomb Plymouth again. Only this time they were in the residential area. And we were walking up the Manameed Hill there. Shore Patrol come by and said, what are you guys doing out here? And we said, we're going back to the hospital. And then pretty soon the Army MPs come by and they asked us the same question. And they said, well, just a block and a half up the street there is a safe house. You guys get hid in that thing, because they're going to start dropping bombs on us here shortly. So we got in the safe house, and when we opened the door and went in, I spotted this gal way down the end in a window seat. Looked like she was having a sandwich and a cup of tea, and I told Bill, I said, I'm going to go down and talk to her. And that's who I married. Sometimes you couldn't get a pass, but we knew one place where we could get off the base without a pass. And we'd be able to see each other in different times of the day, which is very unlikely unless somebody is covering your job or something like that. But like I said before, I said my wife was a jewel. She was also naval, so that made it real good because we understood each other. Although it's two different countries, we understood that we're more alike than people think we're alike. But we were able to get together quite often, and sometimes when I was hauling between Falmouth and Penzance or something, I'd stop at Plymouth and kick my trailer off and take the tractor, and I got my own personal vehicle then. Totally illegal. But nobody ever said a word about it. And my officers knew about it. They knew that I was doing that little trick, but they didn't say a word about it. I found out there were a lot of guns, big guns, right behind the hospital. We didn't even know they were there. Like to worried us to death because they cut off with what size shells they were shooting. I have no idea, but they had a lot of the 20 millimeters and getting ready for the planes when they started dropping bombs to try to shoot them out of the sky. And we just stayed hid there till it all quieted down. And then we walked with Laura back down to where she was quartered, and then we turned around and walked back and went back to base.
So you were in England when the D-Day invasions happened?
Oh yes. So, we worked. We were sent down to the Plymouth Navy base to build pontoon barges. And we worked down there and stayed on the base there for I don't know how many weeks. We were building those barges though, and we'd make a row of them. They were 5 foot square, 5 foot high. And they had steel, pieces of steel to bolt them to make them in one big piece, you know. And then we just kick those off into the bay, and the boys would have the rowboats down there, and they'd get the thing where we could turn it right side up and pull it together and start bolting it to the piece we had before.
Did you know what you were building them for?
Mm-hmm. It was real quiet because the day that it was supposed to come off, they canceled it because of the weather. But the next morning, they went ahead and went in. And I don't know how to explain a bombing to you. And the noises that comes, because there's only, 20 miles between France and Dover. And planes flying in and out. Lots of activity. We didn't get hit at the base in Exeter, but the town got hit. And it was just plain old noisy, that's all. The way I can say it the best is it was noisy. And it was noisy there for a long time because they were bombing raids every night. When I returned to the United States, they took us to, oh boy, what's the name of the place? Up north up there. It was a Navy base out. I can't think of the name of the town. There's a little town there now. It's a pretty good sized town, but then it was just a few buildings. I was there, and then they told us to get our sea bags and ready for pickup, that we were going to South Pacific. And I'd only been home about 35 days from being gone from the time I enlisted over there. And I went to a request mass and met with an officer there and told him that I'd only been back in the States just over a month. And I soon would be getting out anyway. And she said, well, where would you like to go? And I said, well, give me Wainimi. I said, that's only about 19, 20 miles from my home. So she did, and that's, then they took us all down to San Pedro. After a few weeks, I don't remember how many weeks, because I was having too much fun coming home. I worked at any job that was available, and in 1955 I went down and taken my contractor's license exam. I passed. I went in business for myself in 1959, retired in 1979, and left the state in 1979 or 80. I had a C-36 license and a B-1 license.
So what does that mean?
That meant I had a specialty plumbing license, and I had a general contractor's license to build houses or buildings or anything. And I had made a promise to my wife that if I couldn't make a living and exist for 20 years, I would retire then. And if I made a living and could afford it, I still was going to retire then. So I retired in 1979.
Ian Reese McCalister.
Did you grow up in Santa Paula? Are you from Santa Paula?
Yes, I was born and raised here. I graduated from Santa Paula High School in 1967. Well, I was 18 and a 1A draft status, and it was going to be inevitable that I might be drafted. I was drafted April 16th, 1969. Well,
When your son gets a draft notice, you've been through a war, and then he's going to go. I had land, to work on, but he's going somewhere where it's jungles up and down hills and what have you. Naturally, you're going to worry about 25 hours a day.
When I received my draft notice, I was living with my parents in Fillmore and came home from I was working for Southern California Edison at the time. Came home and my dad was sitting there with a drink, which he normally wouldn't do that time of day, and he just said, "Sit down, son," and gave me an envelope and said, "Greetings." And I found out I was drafted. And then I left about 3 weeks later. I went into basic training. My older brother was a 4F classification. He would never go in because he had a bad back, or very bad back. And my younger brother was a 1Y classification that was national defense only. He had lost a finger. Had 3 months of basic training at Fort Ord, and then followed by 3 additional months of advanced infantry training. And then after we graduated during graduation day at Fort Ord, after we graduated, they put us in company formation to give us our orders, and 10 of us out of our company and our sister company were volunteered to go to an NCO school, Non-Commissioned Officers Candidate School, in Fort Benning, Georgia. And I spent 3 months there in what they call 11 Bravo, or 11 Foxtrot which was operations intelligence training, was designed, if you graduate from that school had trained us to go on to a recon platoon or into a division rear area. And after I finished the school there, then I went to Fort Carson, Colorado for about 2 months for on-the-job training, and then had a 2-week leave before I shipped out for Vietnam.
So you got to come home and you guys got married. You had that, right? And then were you able to be here when Julie was born?
Yes, my dad had worked out, my dad, very persistent man, and got a hold of the commanding officer at Fort Carson, Colorado. And through the Red Cross, they exchanged personal phone numbers. All my dad had to do was call when Sue went into labor, and he would see that I got home. She was born when I was in the air.
Okay.
When we landed at LAX, my mom and dad picked me up, and my mother couldn't wait. She says, "You have a beautiful little girl." I left for Vietnam via Oakland, March 6th, 1970.
And had you already been attached to the...
No. You go to Vietnam, you go in the 90th Replacement Company at Benoit, and they decide where you're going. As I said, I was trained for operations intelligence. When I graduated that school at Fort Benning, I came out an E5, a sergeant. And when I went to Fort Carson, Colorado for my on-the-job training, I left there as an E6, which was really unheard of. Not even 11 months in the Army and I'm already a pay grade E6, where most people were lucky if they were E4s. And so when I got to the replacement company in Vietnam, since I had an 11 Bravo or an infantry background, they said, "Good, we have a place for you. Bravo Company, 5th Battalion, 7th Cavalry needs you." Because the whole time over there, I thought, I'll be going on a base, I'll be back there with 800 to 1,000 guys and will be no problem or anything. But I was assigned to an infantry company, which really turned out to be a blessing for me because of the people I knew. When we first got into the replacement company at Benoit, we spent about 4 days indoctrination and getting things in order. And the company happened to be in a rear area pulling night security because they were on a 3-day stand down. And then we left there and flew up to Tay Ninh province, where we would conduct operations, listening posts, little walkabouts, possibly. The government would deny it, but we were in and out of Cambodia quite often. And then we were airlifted from there in May to a place called Bo Dop, where we air assaulted into Cambodia under President Nixon's directive to go in and interdict the supply lines. We went in May 10th, and my company, Bravo Company, was the last one out in the end of June 1970.
And it was just horrific that whole time.
It was. Our company went in with 125 guys, and we lost my captain, lost a really good friend, Mike Wainwright. And I get a little emotional because I miss these guys. Sergeant Sanchez and Bobby Coons and Daryl Burns and a young kid, 18-year-old kid named Chris Keflos, were killed during that incursion. But we had well over 40 casualties. So we went from basically a full-size company down to just about 2.5 platoons. We were not very effective as a fighting unit. The jungle can be a beautiful place looking at it from a helicopter, but once you're in it with all the wait a minute vines that would just have thorns on that when you walk by, you're always walking the wrong direction. You're walking into the thorn and not with the thorn. So they would want to rip your ears, your clothing. The ground is saturated all the time. There's all sorts of scorpions, red and black scorpions. There's snakes that blend into the vegetation so well that you can't see them. And they're in the trees, along with some tigers and apes that would go through at night. We'd wonder what all this noise is and that. And it's a hot, humid, nasty place to be in.
And when that month, a little over, it was about a month and a half, right?
Yes.
When that was over, you guys were given 3 days?
We were supposed to be given a 3-day stand down, but we got back, excuse me, we were sent to the rear area, and we had been there about 8 hours, and they needed us, so we had to load up on helicopters and get back out in the jungle again. So we never really had a full stand down. After June of the end of June 1970, we did not go back into Cambodia. We went back down south into Phuc Vinh province. I found out I had malaria when I was on a division base, and our new medic, Charles Sin, who turned out to be a good friend, was telling the command sergeant major that I had to go to the hospital because I had malaria, and I've had malaria for quite a few months. And the sergeant major said no, that I was just gaming it. But finally the medic got his way, and I went in the hospital for close to a month with malaria. So I never knew when I contracted it, but looking back on it now, I had it basically from the onset when I first got there, I think, because my memory is so bad on things. And that's what's so great about being able to be reunited with these guys, is we talk bits and pieces, and things that I think happened, I'm finding out more and more of those are happening. I just talked to a guy that was in the video, Matt Kaufman, about a situation this past Veterans Day, and he says, oh yeah, we would walk by that every day for about a week. Something that I had thought happened, and no one else knew about it, but Mac reconfirmed it. I see this helicopter coming in, the slick coming in, hovering, and a rope comes out, and some skinny guy with long hair comes sliding down the rope, no pack to speak of, no weapon, and wondered, who in the heck is this guy? And later I found out who he was. He was a combat cameraman for freelance for CBS. And just thought, what in the heck is this guy doing out here? But it turned out what he has done was a fantastic job, a great mission that he did. He was just documenting, or he would just stay with us for a day or two, get his footage when we got into contact, because we would be in contact 1 to 3 times, 4 times a day sometimes. And then he would catch a helicopter out with the wounded, get his film turned in to CBS, and unfortunately my wife and my mother had seen some of the film that he had shot on the Walter Cronkite news.
I was in the kitchen, I believe it's where I was at over there, and my wife let out a scream, and I run into the living room to see what it was, and she said, I saw Ian. Well, he was swiping out a dugout, and she recognized him. I never did see it. I don't want to see it.
It was my bad. I do apologize to my mother and my wife that I would write them letters and say everything's fine. We're not, nothing's going on. You know, but there was a lot going on. I just didn't want to worry them. I wanted to go home. I wanted to be safe and go home. But my job over there was I was a platoon sergeant. And so my job was to make sure I got ammo and water and clothes and sea rations and the mail. When they would get it out, make sure that my guys got all of their stuff. Plus I would sign out every day on the medication that I had to make sure the guys took, get the medication from the medic. And then my platoon leader was wounded and medevaced out, so then all of a sudden I was the platoon leader and a platoon sergeant for a short time until we had a replacement, and then I went back to being a platoon sergeant. So my job was to take care of those guys. So I was, not only was I worried about myself, but I was really worried about them, because we formed bonds that I've got your back and you've got mine, and I don't even have to ask. I know you have my back. I was able to get an early out, a month early out to go to school. So Sue helped me, and we were enrolled. I got enrolled in a full class schedule at Ventura College at night school, because I had a job to come back to. So I left Vietnam. We stopped at Kadena Air Base in Japan for refueling, and then the flight straight into Travis Air Force Base in Oakland. The response was horrible. A lot of guys would get out, and you would have your vacation money or whatever money was owed to you, and we left in Class A dress uniforms, is what the Army put us in. A lot of guys would go right to the department store, buy civilian clothes, and throw their Army uniform away. I just wanted to go home. I wanted to go home, see my wife and my daughter, my family. So I wore the dress uniform, the Class A uniform, and going into the airport was a unique experience I'll never forget, with people calling you baby killers and drug users and spitting on you, and it didn't seem to be a good place to be up in Frisco. The first reunion I went to was in Jacksonville in 2008. And nervous all the way back on the flight back to Jacksonville, and on the taxi ride from the airport, wondering, what do I do? Who am I going to see? What are they going to say? What are they going to think? What am I going to think? Because like I said, I remember so little, that one of my biggest things was, did I do my job? And when we pulled up in front of the hotel in Jacksonville, Florida, Sue and I got out of the cab, and I heard somebody says, "That looks like McCalister." Now, I hadn't seen these guys since, basically most of them since November of 1970. And here we are in 2008, and somebody remembers my name. And from there, it was just an emotional roller coaster, just a fantastic high. It was just great to see those guys.
And you go to DC every Veterans Day?
God willing, we go to DC every Veterans Day, and there's usually between 4 to 7 of us that were in the same company at the same time that are back there. But there's also the rest of different companies in different eras. From 65 to 72 are people that are back there that were in the 5th Battalion, 7th Cavalry. As Sue said, when we go back to our reunions or our Veterans Day, and the guys are all together and we're talking about experiences we had and this and that, and the women are talking about, look at these guys over there, we're worried about them and this and that. And we all love our wives, and our wives love us, but it's two different conversations, and that's where I'm still learning of things that went on. And we even, you talk about it for 3 days, and then when you go to bed at night, you start dreaming about it, or on the flight home, you think about it. And so there's always, I'm always anxious and happy to go see the guys, but I don't want to leave them, because I know when I come home that I'm going to start having a couple of weeks of those thoughts and bad dreams and things like that. But they say the same thing too. They have an emotional high and an emotional low when we do leave.